Hey, it's David, and welcome back to the electrical problems on the Bandit. I want to thank all of you who have offered help and support over the last two videos. First with suggestions for what could be wrong with the Bandit, which was greatly appreciated and has helped me immensely, if only sometimes in helping me to refine my own thoughts. And secondly, to the last video about everyone who has wished me well in recovering from the slight damage to my arm. And it's slowing me down, but I'm trying to get back onto things, and I am trying to get back onto stuff like this. So we're going to see how well that works. First things first, though, is to have a look at the Earth, because the Earth is the thing that came up repeatedly both in my own thoughts and in the comments from you guys, so again, thanks for that. I've had a closer look at the wiring diagram and I understand it better now than I did before. Before I said there was a single earth circuit which connected most of the components in the bike, the lights, the controls, all that sort of stuff is all run off a single earth circuit. And there are some components in addition to that which earth directly to the engine, so things like starter motor, neutral light switch and so forth. And in addition to that, there's a cable here, big thick heavy cable that runs from the battery and earths to the engine, back of the engine. Now I'm quite happy that that cable to the engine is okay. I don't think there's any issues with it as such, though we might come to that in a minute. But what I hadn't properly appreciated was that those other earths to the engine, the starter motor, neutral light switch, all that sort of stuff, don't earth anything other than those single components. All that happens is you've got a live feed to them, it goes to the component and it earths to the engine or to the frame in the case of the coils. And as far as I know, the engine and the frame are only earthed together by the engine mounting bolts. There might be an earth strap in there, I'm not sure. It doesn't really matter, that all seems to be okay. What I hadn't really understood was that, even though I mentioned it in the last video, is that there is only a single earth cable connecting the whole of the wiring, all of this, to the battery. There's no other earth for all of these other components on the bike. If we add that piece of knowledge to the knowledge that it works when the battery is here and it doesn't work when the battery comes back in there, and the likely culprit seems to become much more obvious. And that earth cable that connects is this one here. So just a relatively thin black wire with a white tracer. This is what connects all of the wiring back to the battery, and it runs from this connector here up. It becomes a red wire here because it's been crimped on when the battery was moved back from its original location here, and it runs next to this nice fat earth cable that runs from the battery down to the engine. And this has to be big and thick because this is what runs the starter motor, earth and so forth. So that has to be a good connection. This cable here is a much lighter cable because it's only running the clocks and the lights and so forth. These two wires come out in the battery box here and are both connected up to here. So what I've done is I've cut this piece of heat shrink off because it was holding them really nicely and securely together. And this is the result. So I think we can conclude this is likely to be a large part of the problem. So let's see how this works. Yep. Headlights are on, lights are on. Well, that's not a very good connection. Indicators are running, brake lights running. So yeah, pretty much everything we would expect to be running is running, except the starter motor. So I've still got a separate problem with that, but this certainly seems to be the issue here. So let's sort this one out, and then we can get on with having a look and see if we can find out what's going wrong with the starter circuit. I've made no secret that I dislike those plastic covered connectors, so I'm not going to use them. So I'm going to use heat shrink instead, and I'm going to use a bit of glued heat shrink. I'm hoping that I've got the right size and it will fit. So let's get that on there first, because that's the bit I always forget. And let's make a new end on here. I've absolutely no issues at all with this. I'm quite happy that that's providing a good earth, but I can't just reconnect this to this. Well, I could try and solder it on, but solder's a really bad idea when it comes to bikes, in my opinion, and in the opinions of guys who have a lot more experience in vehicle electrics than me. Vibration and solder is a really bad combination, according to those guys, and I do trust them. I do intend doing something with the electrics back here at some point in the not too distant future, so I don't want to mess around too much in redoing the electrics only to rip them out in a few months' time. Now I'm playing with a new crimping tool here, so we'll see how well this works out. And it's literally the first time I've used it, so added to which I don't have a lot of grip strength. Obviously I've got nothing in here, and my thumb is still badly bruised on this hand, so this is not going as well as I would have liked, and that certainly doesn't seem to have crimped it as well as I would have liked. Maybe that one's a bit big for it. So I'm going to resort back to what I would usually do. I'd hoped the edges would crimp over, but they don't seem to want to. So as I say, just playing with this new tool. Oh no, I think this might be down to the fact it's quite a heavy duty connector rather than well, okay, maybe it's just a lack of arm strength from my point of view. Really weak as a kitten, but that does seem to be on there pretty well. So let's see if we can get the heat shrink on there. So the crimper's connected this to the cable, and the glued heat shrink is now holding the actual plastic to here and providing some extra insulation. So what I should be able to do now, again it will depend if my heat shrink works well enough, is to try and connect these two cables together in a way that allows us to keep them together and reduce the actual flex on them just as they were before, but hopefully a little more successfully this time. And when I come to, I have plans to buy a new battery cable crimper, something a little bit more heavy duty that will allow me to redo these battery connections and earth cables. I think it will be a useful addition to the toolbox. I have my eye on one, but I can't quite afford it at the moment because I've just paid out for things like that tool and some extra connectors and so forth, so my budget's a little bit limited at the moment, so nice to have at some point in the future. So what I want to do now is just reshield this and get those two linked together. This is amazingly awkward to do this with the cast on. I'm sure I will get much better at it with a bit more practice, but for now this is just ordinary heat shrink, it's not glued. Not that I wouldn't have preferred that, but I simply don't have any heat shrink glued heat shrink big enough to get over that terminal. Gives that a moment to cool back down, and let's see what happens when we put this back in the box. I'm not going to reconnect these terminals, these sort of auxiliary cables just yet. In any case, they connect on the other side of this. There we go. Okay. All looks good. Everything seems to be working except for the starter circuit. So I'm going to leave this as is for now. I think I've cured that problem. Now let's dig in to the starter circuit, and I'm going to go and have a cup of tea and give this some more thought. So let's see what we can rule out in terms of knowing what works and doesn't work, and then see if we can work our way through the system. The starter system is quite complicated because it has some safety interlock features which makes testing just much more difficult, because if any one of those interlocks or any of the wiring associated with it is faulty, then we get this problem. Now I have an extract of the wiring diagram that just relates to the starter circuit, and you can see that here are our possibilities: ignition switch, engine stop switch, neutral switch, diode, side stand relay, starter button, clutch lever switch, poor contactor connector, open circuit in the wiring harness. So those are our possibilities for things that could be stopping us. So we need to figure out which is which. Now I've taken the connector blocks apart. So let's double check whether or not the starter motor itself actually works. So we know that works. What we've got here are 4 leads. So we've got 2 power leads and a red, a yellow and a green, and a black and a white. Now these 2 here, the yellow and the green, the black and the white, are the starter relay switches. So if we put power across these 2, then it'll trip the relay Okay, so starter relay is working fine. Now if I test continuity between the starter relay, this lower connection here, it runs through this to the clutch switch, back through here. This green wire, green and yellow wire, disappears down into this wiring harness and comes back out in this one. So this is the cable feed to the switch gear. So we now know that feed will go up here, where it will come through the kill switch wires. Now the kill switch wires I can see are the orange and white and the orange and black. I can see it inside the kill switch if I can't see it on my diagram. So the kill switch at the moment is set to on. Okay, set that to off. Nothing. So there is a circuit through the kill switch. Now what we should be able to do is check that. If we can press that and hold these, well, nothing there. I'm not getting anything at all on the starter switch. Looking like it could be the starter switch. Right, see if we can get that apart. So after a bit of fiddling around to get the throttle cables off and taking out the two screws that hold this switch block in, we get down to the starter switch. There's two wires go to here, the orange and yellow and the green and yellow and the orange and white, and they go to the switch there, which is a simple press contact switch. As far as I can tell, when I put the multimeter against the two soldered ends there and press the switch, nothing is happening. So I'm going to pull this switch out so I can get the actual, I'm going to pull this screw out so we can get the switch out, and then we'll see if we can get it to work. Nothing at all. This seems to be our problem, and I'm guessing it's just dirty. So I'm going to try a bit of contact clean in there and see if that will cure the problem. So I've had the switch apart, cleaned it all up inside. It's quite an interesting design for the switch actually, because it's actually the spring that transmits the power through it, not the actual contact. The contact merely allows the spring to carry the current back down to the outside. There's a center post and an outer ring which are insulated from each other, and it's only when you connect it to the top does the spring connect the two together. So let's see if we can make this work. As always, it's a situation where you need at least 3 hands. See if we can repeat that. Change my hold on the switch, maybe that'll help. Yeah, I think it's working. I think it's just me holding these that's not going too well. Let's put the switch back together and see if we can get it to work when it's all back where it should be. Let's see if we can get these little screws back in without losing any of them down into the engine, which would be a bit of a disaster. Let's test the connectors. Looks like it's working. Just me being a little ham-fisted with the test meter. So let's actually take a gamble and just reconnect up the switch blocks as they stand without putting them back in their rightful places. Just to see what happens. First I have to reconnect the starter relay, because this is what actually powers the rest of the bike, because the power comes down from the battery here into the starter relay, and that is the only power feed into the bike. So just like the earth, there's only one earth cable into the actual wiring harness. This is where the power comes through, and this has the 30 amp fuse, so if that blows you lose power to the bike. Right, let's see what happens. Looking good. Not actually expecting it to start. Don't need to put a clutch in because I've bypassed the clutch lever. There we go. I didn't even prime the carbs. Okay, I'm happy with that. I was looking at that and thinking, fuel gauge isn't working. Yeah, bit of a problem there. Not connected, and that means we're just running on the fuel and the carbs. But this looks like it's good. I'm now going to reconnect all this cabling up properly, run it where it should be, and then let's recap where we were. The bike is back together. Getting the fuel tank on was a struggle. Normally I can get it on without any real issues, but that requires two good hands, with one hand in a cast and the other still with a weakened thumb grip. It was a bit of a struggle and it took me a while. However, it's back on, the seat unit is back on, and the bike is ready to go. The lights work, the electrics all work, and it starts. So it's really more or less ready for a test ride, but I can't do that for some weeks to come yet. Maybe, well, we'll have to see when that happens. So this bike is back on the road. I did lose the oil pressure light when I've got it back together, so that's something to be looked at another date. I'm not prepared to take the fuel tank off again at this point to see if I can see where the problem is because of this, and we'll sort that at a future date. So anyway, thanks very much for watching, and thanks again for all your help, advice and support, and I will see you guys again soon.